happen. They're all the parts are numbered and keyed into a numbered sheet, which is different from the Eagle. This is something we've added recently to our kit designs, and we know you'll be pleased with it. And we'll get on to show you a bit of the flying, and then we'll go on to the building.
Oh no, it's dead stick. I think what I'll do is land her and set that needle in a touch more.
Yeah, okay.
Seems to be the only way to do it is to... Try again and get the best one, eh?
Okay. Can you get a bit lower? I still never got the trees.
Okay. A bit lower.
A bit lower, yeah.
Oh, you'll be in the trees.
Okay, we'll try once more.
And don't go inverted on me. Because I can't go upside down.
No, okay.
That's what I want. That's it. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, I'll come in from your right. I'll come around a fair 8.
Okay. Can you make me see some trees? Is it lower? There we go.
That's a nice loop.
Engine malfunction.
They say that if you stall a jet, you're in big trouble. Well, with the Hornet, we're going to try it and see what happens. I'd like to perfect it so I could do it on takeoff close to the ground. No problem recovering.
Running up the engine. We may remind you that Bob's model will actually take off on the grass, no question about that, but this Blue Hornet's a little quicker, the gear's a little closer, holds the airplane a little closer to the ground.
We would like to, at this time, show you a couple of minutes of our Regal Eagle and our Arrow Mark IV flying.
slow back now, and just try to slow this time.
Okay, now the best place to start in building your Hornet, and now that you've seen it fly, I'm positive you want to build it. We take here, we have within your instructions, Blue Hornet component list. Numbers match the plan. This gives you a whole list such as number 1, 3/8 balsa nose triangles, 4 the same to form a pyramid. So these instructions and these positions and such we give you in this list coincide, of course, with the plan and the main instructions. Now the main instructions are done, or we build the airplane in a logical sequence. You may want to speed things up by gluing your leading and trailing edges to your wing, and then setting them aside to dry and then going on, but we'll do it in the sequence that we have in the instructions. Now the step number 1 is assembly of the main frame. Now the main frame consists of the 2 pre-cut fan mounts and wing spars, which are in your kit. They're made out of light plywood. They bolt to the Byron fan shroud, thus. And this is your main frame for your Blue Hornet. Now, when you get your Byron shroud, it will have a flange, about a 3/4 inch flange all the way around it, which, like on our Regal Eagle, is not necessary. In fact, it helps the glide tremendously by removing it, because it allows an air bypass system, which we found really works in our airplanes, or I guess they wouldn't any airplane if there was room for it. It also allows us to get as large a fan as possible in as an airplane, and as light an airplane, and this is how we get our jet performance in a sport airplane. So if you take and mount these spars, they go on the back of the flange. Then you grind off the flange to make just a tube shape. You're removing the flange, top and bottom, but do leave the 3 lugs that your engine mount fits to. Because later when you put this on, it goes in this position. Now the spars go on in the upright position. The engine mounts here with a cylinder head up at the top here. So that is the upright position of your fan when you get it from Byron, or should you use another fan in this airplane, such as a Dynamax, it will fit perfectly, but you will have to make hardwood rails, and we'll show you that as we build the airplane, where you drop the fan into position and slide it back and forth to find your balance. So we have our main frame made now, and then of course the next step would be we have to get our fuselage sides out. We'll go get them. Okay, the next step is we have to take our fuselage sides. They're pre-shaped, and they got holes drilled in them. This here is your intake side, and this is the rear. That's a wing alignment hole. The next one is a wing alignment hole. The 2 vertical, one on top of the other, is a wing spar holes. We slot between those to make a spar slot. The other 2 holes at the back here, that's for your stabilizer alignment. Stabilizer slides into there. We cut between those 2 holes for the stabilizers to fit in. So I just merely take a knife and I cut through here for the wing spars. And of course, when I got that done, I end up with a fuselage side like this, with that slot in it. Now the next thing we have to do is we put on first, as the plan shows, we give you some nice beefy 1-inch triangular stock. At the rear of the fuselage, you put a piece in top and bottom. That's so you can round off the back end a little later. Now, on the intake end, you just put a piece on the bottom, because the bottom of the intakes on the Blue Hornet are round. Between those now, we now strip with long 1/4-inch long runs, again supplied in your kit. So you end up with 2 fuselage halves like this. This is the main fuse, where the fan mounts. And make sure you make a left and a right. If you make 2 rights, you're going to have to strip all this off or order another fuselage side. Oh, we probably sell you one of those for about $4, but it might cost you $30 in shipping to get to you. So just be careful on that you make a left and a right-hand side. Now, again, we have our fan mounted as such. What we do at this point, we put these spars on to cut this flange off. Now we take the spars off. And one of these Allen key screwdrivers is sure a handy thing, because you can get into the intakes later when you're putting your fan in. And we mount the spars square on the fuselage. And using a square is very important, because it does help us to center our fan. Now, the spar is put through the spar slot like such. And we got another spar here. It goes in like this, pokes right through there, so that we ultimately end up with a left and a right fuselage. Okay, the next step now, that you have your spars mounted into the fuselage sides, is we bolt the fan back into place. And like I said, that's your main frame. Now, what we have to do next is in your kit is a 3/16 balsa, we call it a back plate, because there is no other part like that in any other kit that we know of, so we just merely call it a back plate because that's what it is. Now it has to be measured. We give it to you a little oversized. You want to draw a square line on one end. So it's square, and then you come down 8.5 inches. Has to be exactly 8.5 inches wide. Now if you don't trust yourself in measuring, you have to have 2 square lines put on there, so you'll need a square, but it is the width of your 2 fiberglass tail cones we give you. Exactly 8.5 inches when they're later placed onto that back plate. So, take that and we take some pins. It's a good idea to pin this back plate first before we glue it, just to make sure it's all lined up. And again, we have the square line on there. So we line it up. It's already cut for you, the depth of the fuselage. We line that up square and pin it into the triangular stock. And we'll take and pin the other side at the top as well. And then we line up the bottom, again, square that square line we drew on the balsa wood. And then we pin the other bottom. Now, as pin, just double check your lines. Okay, they're right on, so it's nice and square. Now at this point, your fuselage will be a little funnel shaped. It's narrower at the back than it is at the intakes. Because if we measure across the fan area, now if you built the Reagle Eagle, you'll notice we asked you to build it square, same width at the back as it is at this point. Well, the Hornet's a little different. It is funnel shaped, so it's 9 1/4. It's the same width as the Reagle Eagle here, but it funnels down. So it's very important that you do this, because your alignment later for your vertical fins. is dependent on you getting this at exactly 8.5 inches. Then we can just glue this in place with zap. And once you have this zapped in place, the back plate, now these spars here attached to the fuselage sides, I just instant glued or zap them in place. At this point now, they should be epoxy so that they're good and secure front and back. You could even put a little bit of glass cloth and epoxy on either side to make sure these spars and fan mount are anchored secure. Okay, step 5 now is to install top and bottom sheeting 19 and 20. And of course, if you refer to the identification sheet and your plan, it'll show you sheet 19 and 20. Now, the entire top of this fuselage is sheeted cross grain. And we give you ample 3/16 wood to sheet right on through. The first one on the top measures back 6 inches from the top of the intake. We put a mark there at 6 inches. Very carefully, put a mark at exactly the same 6-inch point. We make sure we're all nice and everything is lined up and looks good at this point. And we, of course, have our funnel shape here. Now we line this up on our 6-inch line. And we tack it in place with our instant glue. Okay, now this sheet we have glued on. The bottom sheet has to go on 1/4 inch ahead of this one. Now, on the plan, there's a measure. You'll notice the measurement. There's a position of this bottom sheet on the plan. So it should be measured from here to the position on the plan. I've already marked this. Then we take that bottom sheet. And it has to be 1/4 inch ahead because of the way the nose piece fits into our airplanes. And if you build a Reagle Eagle, you'll understand why. And it will not pose a problem to you. But be sure you get this sheet just 1/4 inch ahead of the top one. And we will tack it into place. Turn it over. And finish gluing on the inside of the seam. Now the fixed landing gear, if you're putting the fixed landing gear in, it comes in the kit. And it consists of a plywood plate, pre-bent landing gear wires, and the landing gear wires are put onto the plate in this manner with landing gear straps, the same as you'd use for putting landing gear in the bottom of the wing, let's say for a torque system. But these landing gear straps hold the gear onto this plywood plate and are screwed in securely. Now, when you have the gear physically in your hand and a plywood plate, it will come to you very easily how it goes on, but that's how it goes on. Now you take your fuselage at this point, measure on the plan where the landing gear strut goes, and put a mark on each side of your fuselage where the landing gear strut goes. Take and punch or drill a hole into the bottom for your landing gear strut. The hole, of course, should be in line so that when your plate is in position, in other words, the hole is, for the strut, is beyond the 1/4 inch. Now what we do is we put the gear into place like so, turn it around, epoxy that plate very securely to the inside of the fuselage. Now, I do it now because it's much easier to get to it rather than wait until I have the nose piece and the rest of the sheeting on. You put, of course, your left and right. Make sure you get left and right, that the wheels actually can't outward. This gives you a wider track for good ground control. Now, I'm not going to put the landing gear in this one. But I'm building this one up with retractable landing gear. And on the Eagle video, we showed you mainly how to put the fixed in and told you put retracts. We didn't go into too much detail how they go in. But we're going to show you this one built up with the retractable landing gear. So we won't put the fixed in it, but that's how they go in. It's a very simple process. Okay, now we're going to finish sheeting the top of the fuselage. You have more of these 3/16 sheets for cross-grain sheeting, the same as the sheet 19 and 20. And we're going to sheet right up and around the fan shroud. We start at the back plate. And we'll tack that into place. I just tack this with the instant glue and then I turn it over and go along all the inside of the seams and get it on there securely. Now we put the next sheet in place and we put the next sheet. It takes 3 sheets of 4-inch to go up to this point on the fan. Now we just tack those as well. Make sure you have some overhang so that you can sand it down and the corners later. Okay. Now the top will look like this. Doesn't really look too much like a Hornet just yet, but it will. In your kit, you've got some shorter 3/16 sheets. Cut those in half and cut them nice and square. Again, use a square on the edge of it and make your first cut square, then cut it in half. So we end up with a piece like this. Now we've got a sheet right around this fan shroud on this one. This is a little different than the Eagle. Bevel that off with some sandpaper, sanding block, so that it butts and fits right up against the fan. And we'll tack that in place. And of course, you do the other side too. And what it will look like from the top, when you're finished, is these pieces of 4-inch butt into the fan. This piece will go on the same way. Then we have to cut a strip of 3/16 to fill in this space. Okay, the next step now is we have 2 sheets, approximately 2 1/4 inches wide each. And they're both identified as sheet 38. And on the plan it shows you a sheet 38, bottom, left and right side. Well, either one can go left or either one go right. We turn the main fuselage upside down and it fits on to the corner of the fuselage, to the back. Now these sheets are a little longer. We give you an extra couple of inches just so you've got some cut off there to make sure you have enough. And it's put into position. We'll just tack glue these now. that. We tack it together and then go along all the inside seams with the instant glue, and any of the stress points, which we'll show you later, we just reinforce with some epoxy. And when we get these two bottom pieces on, the bottom of the fuselage at this point will look like this. If you remember the Regal Eagle, both the top and the bottom were done this way. Well, with the Hornet, only the bottom's done this way. The top is, as we showed you, sheeted right around the fan, and we still have to put in these little pieces here to fill in those spaces. Now we're going to get into the nose part of the fuselage. These come in your kit pre-cut. They're a rather intricate cut, notched and such, and cut. You know, this here is actually for air bypass once the is assembled into the main fuse. Now these sheets we take, and we've again already done some pre-assembly to speed up the video for you. On the plan, it'll show you where to put your triangular stock. On the nose, there's triangular stock again, so you can shape that nose nice and round. The rest of it is 1/4-inch strips. What we do is we mark the position for the nose wheel plywood mount, again, that's supplied in your kit, so that it'll notch into place. Now this hole here, these holes right here, that's pipe cooling holes. They're going to be put on each side. They're marked on the plan. Those you have to cut in. A Dremel tool is mighty handy for that, or just a knife and then sand it. They don't have to be that exact shape, but they should be that area to draw enough air. The fan draws enough air under the wing strakes into these holes and right past the tune pipe and keeps it cool. The tune pipe goes up into the nose, like in the Regal Eagle. Now, you have to make a frame. On your plan, there's a frame shaped like this. This is just some 3/16 scrap, and we make that frame up. Now that is a rear frame. This is a nose piece done up with the front former, which is pre-cut in your kit, plywood nose wheel mount, and you should pre-drill this for your steerable nose wheel, whether it's going to be retractable or fixed. If you pre-drill it before you put it in, it's much easier to get to it. These two position in. Your back frame that you've made goes into place, lined up at the top. Now, we'll just glue that into place. Now the whole assembly will go together like this. The nose wheel mount will notch in. That front former, of course, fits in. And your back frame. Now all this glues into place. And again, it's a tapered or funnel shape. It's wider here where it fits into the main fuse than it is at the nose. But this is all automatic because all these two parts are pre-cut, and this frame is on your plan.
All right.
Okay, now we've got this glued together. The next step is a simple one. Piece of 3/8 balsa block goes on the top. Now the top is notched. It has a little notch, about 1/4 inch notch in it here. And that block goes from that notch forward. And of course, the face of it, the front of it, we'll sand down later level so that our radome or our extreme nose pieces can go on there. So we'll just put these on into place, this block I should say, and that's part of what gets carved later. sheet the rest back at the top here. That's not sheeted. That's the fiberglass fairing. That's over that later. We now take, in your kit is some 1/4 inch by 4 board. We cut it to fit. Okay, I think we had a blip there. My camera. Okay, camera operator, I think, blipped me out there. Okay, the next thing we do is we put on the bottom 1/4 inch sheet. We give you a length of 1/4 inch in your kit, and what we do is sheet from the nose wheel plywood mount forward and cut this sheet off at the nose. Now if you're putting retracts in though, that's why we're not putting the sheet on just yet. We're just showing you where it goes. This is for fixed gear. If you're putting retracts, you will want to mount your retract, get your fold position of your retract as it folds forward and retracts in. Then you'll want to make a cutout in this for the wheel, or the retract position for the wheel. And then put this sheet on, trim it down, sand it round and such. So we'll just leave that for now because we are going to put retracts in this one. Now we have the extreme nose or ray dome. In your kit is some 3/8 balsa triangles, 4 of them. They make up a pyramid, and they go together like this to make up a pyramid. And I've got one already glued together. So you'll end up with a pyramid like this. Now, if you're putting retracts in, it's a good idea to sheet just this little bit at the front here, because we want to center, and of course you'll sand all this down. We want to center this pyramid on the nose, like such. Now the angle is, there is an angle cut at the front to give it a little tip downward, like the F-18 Hornet and most jets are. They droop at the nose. But you can check with the alignment of the plan and make sure that you have that position, because that is what looks best on this airplane. Okay, now we're going to put the nose piece into the main fuselage. It helps, again, you've probably noticed I had the main fuse blocked up on some styrofoam here. Well, you can use a couple of boxes or anything, because your fan hangs below the fuse at this point, and it will rock and be tipsy and very hard to work on. Now to put the nose in, which we have at this point, incidentally, you can sand this nose round first before you put it in. But we like to put it together and then do all the sanding, because all these edges are going to be sanded down and just rounded off, top, bottom, all 4 sides. And of course this nose is going to be shaped nice and round. You got lots of stock in there with a 1-inch triangular, 3/8 here and 3/8 nose pieces. Now to center this nose in, what we do is we take and we measure across the fuselage exactly. Do not necessarily use your plan. There might be some paper shrinkage or stretchage. Measure the actual airplane width from the outside to the outside. And again, this is best done before you round it off. Once it's rounded, it's very difficult to find the exact width. So while you've got square edges here, measure it across. This is 9.5 inches. So we will take, at 4 3/4 inches, we put a center mark here. Now we go to the back of the fuselage, and we measure that exactly, the 8.5 inches, and we put a center mark here. Now we take the top of the nose piece, and we measure across here, and it has to be fairly accurate, but you can do it. This is, the center of this actually comes to exactly 1 15/16. But do not go by what I say on these measurements, and do not measure the exact plan. When you made this frame, you may be a 1/16 off. That won't hurt the airplane a bit, but you do want to get it centered. So measure the actual airplane you're building for the center. Measure the overall side width, and then find the exact center. When you've found that, it merely fits into place like so. It butts against the top sheet, and it rests on the bottom sheet. Now, block up the nose to give you the height on the plan. Or for that matter, stand back and look at it you'll know when it looks good. But if you feel more comfortable, measure from the bottom of the plan up in about 3 points, mark them and block up the fuselage accordingly. So it butts against here, right level, flush, and it rests on the bottom plate, that bottom sheet, which is sheet 20. Now when it's centered here, good idea to pin it so that won't shift at that point, because you may have to swing it a little. So let's just run a pin into here to stop it from sliding sideways on you. Now we've marked a center line here. We take a piece of string and pin it from here and stretch it right across and down the fuselage past this center line, right on this center line. And bring it right down to here, and we shift the nose into position, left or right, till it lines up, the string is perfectly straight. You can then pin the string at this point on the nose if you wish, stand back and eyeball that string to make sure it is straight. Or you can use a long ruler straight edge. You can get a 36-inch steel straight edge, which you can line across that string, and that will bring you certainly close enough. This is the only part in this kit that depends on a certain amount of skill or visual eyeballing, as we call it, to get it straight. There is no way to do this by jigging it or anything other than you could lay it over top of your plan. The plan is accurate to within a pencil line, but again, paper on the plan could stretch or shrink or warp with humidity, so it is best to do it with the string. Now, when this is in place, the next step, again, you take your 3/16 balsa, you have lots of pieces, and we sheet the intakes forward. And they glue up against this nose piece, top and bottom. We cut them off here, measure, pre-measure ahead of time, cut the width, leave an extra 1/8 of an inch for sanding, and put them on each side, right across the top and the bottom. That will hold your nose piece in place. Now, what we're going to do now, next, is we're going to show you the fiberglass parts and how they fit. What you should do at this point, once this is all glued and sheeted in, is take your tail combs. Now, again, we know they fit that back plate because we fitted them onto the back plate before. So they center on the back plate. You'll notice the tail cone is a little higher or a little deeper than the entire fuselage at this point. The excess goes to the top, hangs up over the top here, and we do fill that in with a piece of scrap balsa later and just sand it round and fair it in. And that gives the tail cone a continuing flow from the top of the fuselage out. So what we do is we zap these tail cones into position. And I just use a couple of drops of the instant glue to hold them. Now, I put one on at a time. First, all fiberglass has to be sanded where you're going to glue it. I take, and to do a neat job here, I'll just get my tape here. To do a neat job after this is sanded, I take and I run masking tape around the tail cone, about a 1/2 inch around, all the way around. And that gives me a nice even line for the glue I'm going to use, because I'm going to mix some epoxy up with a bit of microballoons or talcum powder in it to thicken it up so it stays where it's put. And this will be now tacked into position. And I take some epoxy and I use my finger because it does it the neatest way possible. And I run epoxy all around and bead the tail cone into place in that back plate. When that one is set, then I put the next one on and I do the same thing with it. Then when you remove this tape, after this is epoxied on, you remove that tape before the epoxy really sets at the gel point, let's say, where it's still a bit gummy. Remove the tape and you'll get a nice clean epoxy line around which doesn't even really have to be sanded. And if you're careful with your finger, you can gusset it in, and you won't be wasting a lot of time sanding. When it's painted, it'll look like it was molded right into the airplane that way. Now we'll go on to the next. Okay, this is the fiberglass top fairing, which you're not going to install it yet permanently, but you do have to fit it. Now it is notched here. Those notches fit to this sheet 19. But we've told you to sheet in here, the top. That's right. This is just a position. You will have to now cut this off to fit down. In other words, those notches fit in that position. But you have to now trim it off to fit down and lay flat against the top of the air intakes, or this sheeting that would be across here. But we left it out to show you the positioning of it. Now, what we have to do in the next step is just put it in position. We're going to show you how it fits. Now, the top is molded at the front here with a lip or an end plate on it. It has to be molded that way so it'll hold its shape. What you do is when this block is carved round to your satisfaction and shaped nice, we're not actually shaping this on tape because we're saving some of the time in this tape to give you a few more hints later on that we didn't put in the Reagle tape. You cut this fiberglass straight across here. A fine-tooth hacksaw blade will do it so that it fits right over the shape that you've carved this block. It will be a little flexible at that point when this end plate is removed. Now, it butts against here is the position. It will center itself on here, but to be doubly certain again, measure the center at the back of the fuselage here, measure across here, and make sure that this is centered. When it is centered, we now draw a line around it. Use it as a template to draw a line in this balsa sheet, both sides. Now we remove it, and this line is marked. This line is marked on the plan, and that's the line of this fiberglass fairing when it fits on. Move in 1/4 of an inch from that line, and cut this top sheeting out, so that we now have an opening for the thrust from the fan. We're not blocking with these sheets. We'll also cut this one out around like so that your engine cylinder head sticks up through this in this position here. Now you can drill a hole here for your glow plug starter, or you can cut a hatch in this to get to the cylinder head. That's important because I found that with the larger engines, the vibration and running after a few flights, especially a new engine, the cylinder head will get loose. You lose power, a lot of smoke comes out of the airplane, and you wonder why you can't tune your engine or needle your engine in properly. Probably the cylinder heads come loose, the bolts. So if you have a hatch on this top fairing, which is very easy to cut and then form a lip with 6 feet plywood and screw it back in place, you can get to the cylinder head without taking the engine out. Now, the engine in this airplane goes in from the bottom. We have a hatch on top to get to the cylinder head and the glow plug, but the engine goes in from the bottom, but is still upright. And that's a little tricky. We're going to show you that later. You make this cutout now, so that when this fairing fits over, of course, it completely hides that cutout. And we will, ultimately, when this is put on, seam it in place securely with a bit of a strip of fiberglass cloth and resin or epoxy cloth. Now when that's done, or before or after this point, you can sand your entire fuselage to your satisfaction. Shape it all around, sand all these corners, take off the excess overhang here, top and bottom. The bottom stays open, and that is a fiberglass bottom pan which we will install last. We tell you later on the instructions to fit it and make sure it's fitting and everything, but do not permanently attach it, and do not permanently attach this one until we get further on, until everything is installed. It makes it so much easier. Okay, now we'll go to the next step. Okay, now we're going to switch to this fuselage here, which is a little bit ahead of the instructions because we've done all our shaping on this now. We have attached the vertical fins and stabs. Tail cones are on, as we showed you. Excuse me. Now, the tail cones have to be cut open. You have to grind this out right to the full diameter of the tail cone. Do not leave a lip on there at all. They're curved in the mold slightly so we can get them out of the mold, but don't leave that curve on. They got to be the full diameter. And again, here's little top fairings we told you about, just to fill in this space here. Carve that round, sand it. It looks nice, just a little feature that adds to scale appearance. Now in the plan we show a balsa wood spar. This has to be put through. That's it there. Marked on the plan. It has to be put in. Now, there's balsa wood rails here. Remember we cut out for that fairing, the fiberglass fairing. Well, I just glue on some strip balsa wood on the edge. That helps support it, of course, and gives it a lift for the fiberglass fairing to sit on. Now, the entire inside of this airplane has to be fuel-proof. Not the entire airplane, but from the air intakes right back. And of course, it's best done, or easiest done, before you put your bottom fiberglass pan or the top fairing on. If you take a brush, it takes about, we've got the instructions, about 4 coats of dope. I like doing it black because it hides any imperfections and makes it dark on the inside. It looks more real. 4 coats of dope or a couple of coats of polyurethane. Coat all the inside thoroughly so that fuel won't bother it. Now, the balsa back plate, of course, gets ground out to the inside diameter of the tail cones, like on the Reagle Eagle. But there's one difference. These are 2 separate tail cones for scale appearance, and also it does nozzle down the thrust, which is part of the reason why this airplane goes a lot faster and takes a little longer to get off the ground than the Eagle does. We have more speed at the top end. We have more velocity thrust and less static thrust. Okay, now on the Hornet, there is no thrust tube. The Reagle Eagle and our Avro Arrow both have thrust tubes because of the shape of the fuselage. The Hornet nozzles down to the tail cones on its own. We tried it both ways. There's actually no difference in thrust, but we save the weight of the thrust tube, which is a few ounces. So therefore, the performance, vertical performance, would be better because we're saving that weight. But in actual thrust, there is no difference, so we left it out. I think it's the first fan jet on the market that does not have a thrust tube. The actual rear end of the fuselage to the tail cones is the augmenter tube, or thrust tube, as you would call it. So, if there isn't one in your kit, it'll tell you on the instructions we don't need one. Now, on this particular one, as I said, we were building up for retracts. We have the retract holes cut out. And we're going to show you shortly how they go in. We have the retract nose mount. The retract forward. Remember what I said about leaving this open here, because you have to have room for the wheel to go up, and then this could be sheeted on the side and fitted nicely so there's just enough room for the wheel. And at this point is a very good time to put in your nye rods. And we're going to show you a trick that I just learned on nye rods very shortly, but you drill through the spar. Now you can pre-do this. We tell you on the instructions you can pre-do this. It's a good idea. Drill through your fan mount spar so the nye rod feeds through, and torque rods are used on the elevators. The torque rods go to the inside of the fuselage. Ultimately, when we put the ailerons in position, the torque rods go through to the inside of the fuselage for ailerons, so nothing is hanging on the outside. One feature of the Hornet that I came up with was we used the heavy-duty torque rods to the inside, and the torque is up, so that the pulling is for up elevator. In other words, rather than pushing from the bottom and getting a buckling in the nye rods, we're pulling, and you have a lot more strength pulling to get up elevator than you do pushing from the bottom. It eliminates flutter. However, if you get sloppy and leave an awful lot of gap or space in your hinging and don't hinge them properly, you will get flutter in any airplane that goes much over 100 miles an hour. And this one is about 20 miles an hour faster than the Eagle, which would make it up in the 160s. With optimum, of course, equipment and a good engine, and that's with an OS 77. With a 61, it will fly off pavement. It will fly off shortcut grass or hard-packed ground. It will not fly off any grass field like the Eagle will with a 61. It does require a 77, and it requires about twice the distance to take off that our Regal Eagle does. Okay, now, we put the shroud in place. That's the fan shroud. Now, it's a good idea at this point to make sure it fits in, because you may have to shave this hole here a little larger. Again, that's why we don't put the bottom plate or anything on yet. You may have to shave that wood just a little bit so that you can put your fan shroud in, turn it sideways, and slip it into the mounts. Now, putting the engine in this one is a little trickier than the Regal Eagle. We put the plane upside down, and at this point, of course, making a stand for your airplane is a good idea because it's handy too to have at the flying field. The trick to this is, we put the engine in first and let it just hang there because it's an upright engine going into the plane from the bottom. So we actually physically bolt the engine in later, but first we put the engine in. It will work in tight, and let the engine just hang there. Now the three-legged mount has to go in. This holds the engine in place. So, again, this is where you really need one of these screwdrivers. We take that bolt and we go in through the intakes, through the three-legged mount, through the fan shroud, and into the plywood plate, which, by the way, on the instructions we tell you to epoxy blind nuts to the back of those plates. This has already been done, of course, on this one, and you should do that. You can do that at any point along the construction. Now, getting these bolts and getting this three-legged mount in, I'm not going to kid you, it isn't easy. We painted black in there, you can't see it, but they do go in because you've had the shroud in before and you made that space perfect. Okay, now the three-legged mount is bolted in securely. The engine is just kind of hanging there. Now we turn it upside down, and we just use these foam blocks to protect our wood. And you'll remember me saying that we cut a hatch in the top of that fiberglass fairing. Well, this is one very good reason why you should do that. Because we have to now shift the engine into place, into the shroud. It now sits on the mount, and we bolt the engine from the top. Get that bolted down and just sort of install everything temporarily, and then it can be removed for painting. You can just put one bolt in the engine. That's what I do. I just put it in place in one bolt to hold it securely there while I fit everything else, because this is the type of airplane you really must fit everything before you go ahead and finish it off. It's easily removed and put back in later, but to actually install it after you finish the whole airplane, it would be pretty tricky. Now, we have our tune pipe, and it goes forward up into the nose, rear exhaust 77. Now, this, the Eagle will fly with a 61 side exhaust because it's got long intakes, and your tune pipe can actually go up into the side of the intake. They've been flown quite successfully that way. but the Hornet is a higher performance machine, and it should be built to a little more rigid specifications that I've designed. We just couldn't give you everything and give you a good-looking standoff scale airplane, high performance as well. You should have a rear exhaust engine, unfortunately, for the Hornet. A little more money, but it's well worth the effort when you get flying one. Now the pipe will go in ultimately into the intakes before we put the engine in. The pipe will go in through the fan like it does in the Eagle, and then forward into the nose. But at this point in time, we can just put it into place like so here. And the header that comes with the OS-77 is already bolted onto the engine. And that's the sort of, I guess you'd call it a subheader. It's a small header. And the Byron pipe and header fits nice and tight over that. Now at this point, you can turn the plane back upside down, and I'm going to show you just what we have here. There's the tune pipe position. Now if you turn the plane back upside down, you have to cut a piece of 3/16 sheet and insert it like the instructions say, and it's also the side views drawn on the plan. Insert it into this compartment. It serves to hold your tune pipe in place, but also as an insulator for your radio, because like the Reagle Eagle, this is your radio compartment below the tune pipe. Now, when you get that plate into place, of course, later we'll get into the installation of the radio, which you have lots of room on this baby. You could put 20 servos in there. So the pipe tuning, of course, can be done from the bottom hatch here. If you have to move the pipe in and out to tune to the engine, it can be done from the top. The carburetor will be in line right here on the engine, which lines up perfectly in line to the throttle servo. It's just a nice tight fit, a nice tight package, but it does all go in there and makes one gorgeous airplane when it's finished. So we'll turn this back upright again, and we'll show you some of the other parts we have to work on. Now, we said we'd go into a little more detail on how to put the retracts in, and we're doing that now. Of course, with the plane upside down, because that's where the wheels are going to go. It's a plywood plate cut, and it's notched. You can see on the plan we show you a plywood plate angled with a big wide slot in it for the retract. So I'll give you that view, and that view. Now, you'll notice it's angled because the wheels angle outwards to give it a wide track, but when they fold, they go back in and tuck in beside the fan shroud. Now, it's a snug fit on this airplane. You must position this plate so that when the wheels fold, they just come up against that or not quite touch the fan mount. So you have to really kind of jiggle a bit before you go ahead and drill the holes for it. So with that plywood plate, we can take them, even with the engine in position. It's much easier to, of course, pre-align them before you put your fan mount and shroud and such in. Then remove them to do your painting and put them back in. Have all your holes drilled and everything. Now, fold that down. It will go in the intake. It goes above the nye rods. Comes up into position, like so. And then, of course, you can bolt it into position. Having the blind nuts on the back of this plywood will help. I haven't done this yet. Okay, have to in there. fellas out there are dentists. I make it a little easier because there we go. It's caught on once you get one in. And we bolt that plywood plate in right through the bottom of the fuselage. Because we found by experience that just epoxying the plate or gluing it in, a hard landing would break the plate out. And once there was a lot of oil from the engine inside the airplane, it made it very difficult to re-epoxy the plate back in. So if you're putting retracts, glass cloth and resin or glass cloth and epoxy, the bottom of the fuse is a very good idea. And also you could put a double layer over this area here alone where you're going to bolt through to bolt this plate. Now the plate sits on the inside. It sits on the 1/4 inch rail. Remember the 1/4 inch long run stringers we put in? It sits on there so that the plate is a 1/4 inch higher against the outside of the fuselage than it is to the inside. When this is bolted in, the plate is actually tilted at an angle like this, which means your strut comes out at an angle and gives your wheel track a little wider than the fuselage width. But because of the angle we've designed into it, and the angle tilted this way, they do fold back and come into the fuselage and fit neatly there. Now, the wheel on the bottom does show a little bit. You can raise this plate up, or the plane is upside down so it would be dropping it down. You can drop it down with another 1/4 inch plate if you wish. That would bury that wheel right in. But in the air, it's never even seen, especially at the speed this thing flies. So, our nose wheel, of course, we have pre-bolted this onto, well, we pre-drilled it first, like we told you, and bolted the retract nose gear into place. So we can just merely put this and our steering arm into place. Now, depending on the retracts you use, of course, you'll have to drill a hole through the firewall, we'll call it, or the nose wheel mount plywood for your push rod to the steering. And we'll just tighten this up now. We've put the double wheels on this one. It's a little more scale and looks great. I happen to have an oleo strut I picked up in my travels one day, and so I decided to use it on the Hornet. Now at this point, we have the airplane looking pretty good. It's starting to really take shape and look like a Hornet. In a few minutes it'll look even more that way. I'm just going to put a screw in this plate to hold it temporarily for now, because I am going to pull all this equipment back out later to paint this. And a little further on we're going to go into how we paint our airplanes. Not that we profess to be good finishers, and we certainly don't get show finishes on our airplanes, but we have developed an easy way to paint an airplane for flying. And because the plane is a combination of fiberglass and epoxy glass and balsa, we've discovered that certain mediums do work best for this combination of an airplane. However, some fellows choose to monocoat the jets that they buy from us. But I'm no good at monocoating, so I have to live with painting. So now we can turn it over and set her on our wheels. And she's starting to look a little like a Hornet. Now, if you want to see what she looks like from this point, we can take and put a fiberglass back on. I have a canopy taped in place, which of course would be the last thing to go on. And fit this in here. We're not going to seam this yet until it's all... There we go. Not going to seam this on until we get everything all, making sure everything fits and we've got all the inside components. Probably even mount the radio, hook up push rods, make sure everything's working, get our throws adjusted, and then do the final bit of glass work, putting that on. Now these are your wing strakes, which go on, and this spar through here is on the plan. That must be there. Do not eliminate this. You get an awful lot of flutter from these strakes. Now what we do here is, again, it has an end plate molded in on the strake. That must be cut out to fit in place, the other one. And also, we grind it out here, or notch it out to fit over the wing, which I'll show you when we get the wing on. And we made a little slot in here, slides onto that spar. And we'll eventually later glass these all into place. They should be seamed on with fiberglass cloth and resin. Now, let's see, just a minute, where was it? I better read these instructions. I think I'm confused. Now, the tail end, all the tail fins here, we'll get into that in your kit. The vertical fins are cut in two pieces and have to be glued together like this. They're cut that way because we cut them from 4-inch stock, and they're all pre-cut. They, of course, go into position here. There's a left one and a right one, but it doesn't matter which is left and right. Now, we would like you to take the time to sand them nicely airfoiled, because the more airfoil and the sharper the leading edge and trailing edge is on these vertical fins, the faster the airplane will go. Reduced drag, and also it'll fly better when you roll upside down. You won't have to apply as much down elevator to hold it level. Because you see what happens, you trim for drag at the top. Now, if these are the full 1/4 inch thick, and you just sort of round them roughly and don't shave them down to an airfoil, you have a lot of drag at the top flying level, which has a tendency to pull the nose of the plane up. So you may end up adding nose weight to compensate for this. When you do that, now you roll the airplane upside down on its axis. This drag above the centers of pressures is now on the bottom of the airplane, pulling the nose down. And you've added nose weight to compensate for pulling the nose up. So now, when you roll upside down, it would dive, and you'd have to apply a lot of down elevator in inverted flight to hold it up. So you want to reduce the drag above the center of pressure or center of gravity as much as possible. Airfoil these nice. Now, the stabilizers are done the same way, except it's a smaller triangle, cut from 4-inch stock, pre-shaped. This little piece you find in your kit goes here. And again, there's a left and a right one. Now, we had the holes we showed you in the fuselage side, which you have to slot through. And they're 1/4 inch holes, and this is 1/4 inch stock. So once you make that slot, you insert your tailplane spar. Do not eliminate this. It won't affect the thrust. It doesn't slow it down at all, but it's got to be there. You should round off the leading edge. Coarse sandpaper, round off the leading edge, just so the airflow will go over it smoother. Insert it into place through the slot. The plan shows the position for that, which is distributing the stress equally on the tailplanes the best we can do it. And then you have to take, when this spar is in place, you take your stabilizer and lay under it in line with the end of the slots and mark with a pen a line for the spar and cut out a notch for that spar. Then your stabilizer will fit right in over that spar, and the whole unit should be epoxied well. And this is a piece of 1/4-inch stock laid in here with epoxy, sanded, concave, ferret out. This whole area should be glass cloth, top and bottom, where the stabilizer joins onto the main fuse. This should also be glass cloth and epoxy, or glass cloth and polyester resin, right along there, about an 1.5 wide band, and on the inside. There's an awful lot of stress on these angled fins. Now, as far as putting these fins on, you will notice on the Hornet they're angled outward. We have it's actually a 21-degree angle. And that's very close to the real one. Now, what you have to do is on the plan you'll notice there's a drawing, it's a half circle sort of with an angle, a 20-degree angle drawn on it. You have to cut a cardboard template for that angle. You then measure the position for the back of the fin according to the plan and put a mark with a pen here and a mark here, so the back of the fin lines up on that mark. Now you take the edge of the outside sheet, that is the extreme outside of the 3/16 side sheet or fuselage side. It's sanded round, but you haven't painted it yet, so you can see the line where the edge of that sheet is, and you can see the line here where the edge of the sheet is. You line the fin up, and again, we'll remove this now because that cardboard template has to fit flat on the fuselage. Line up the back of the fin to here. Measure in at the leading edge of the fin 3/8 of an inch. Because remember, you do have a funnel-shaped fuselage, but we do not want the vertical fins funnel-shaped. The plane would still fly, but it would fly very slow and nose high. So, measure an exact 3/8 of an inch. Now if you're out 1/64 of an inch or so, it wouldn't matter as long as you're both out the same. But even a little out isn't going to hurt, but try and get them lined up. This is not as simple a building job as the Reagle Eagle. We're not telling you it is. It takes a little more building skill, a couple of levels higher. These fins must be in line straight, even though the fuselage is funnel-shaped. When you get that position, you can hold the fin in position or get somebody to help you hold it. Put the cardboard template against it, flat on the fuselage, to get your angle, and then run some instant glue along and hold it for a second or two till it sets. And then do the other one, and then a double check for position while you've got the instant glue is to take a square, flat on your stabilizers, and bring the square right up to the tip of the fin. I'm going to turn this around so that the camera can pick it up a little easier for you. And we'll aim that out, make sure you get it right, because this is the easiest way to check it. We lay this flat on the stabilizers, and line it up with the tip of that fin. There we go. I think you can see that. Aurora, on the camera, can you see that okay?
Fine.
Okay, good. Now, with this line up with the tip, you can get somebody else to measure this, or you can measure with a pair of calipers. Measure the distance out from the side of the fuselage to the edge of the square. Now, make a note of that distance. Line your square up to that distance on the other side in the same position, and check to see if you have your angles and positions of the fins right. That will get you as close as you need to be for maximum performance, maximum speed, and general all-around good flying of the airplane. Now, if you wish, on the plan we've marked a position for fins. I'm going to cut them into this one. The fins I'm sorry, rudders. The rudders cut into the fins, out of here, in the position on the plan, hinge in position, and go through the fuselage to the inside of the fuselage with torque rods. We don't supply the extra torque rods with this kit for that. You'd have to buy a set, but they're the same as the torque rods. We do supply two sets. One is for the ailerons and one is for the elevators. So this will hook up on the inside. Again, your rudder hookup is buried inside the airplane, and the nye rod goes through the plywood fan mount and up into the radio compartment. Now, if you do hook up rudders, not just one on this airplane. On the Reagle Eagle, or any aircraft that has twin fins but has the fins 90 degrees to the fuselage or the airstream, you can just hook up one for knife edge flight or to help steering on the ground at high speed. But with the 20-degree slope on the Hornet, they have to operate the same as the real Hornet. You have to hook them both up, because with this angle, you will get a 20% up elevator effect when you go to left rudder. When you go to right rudder, you'll get a 20% down elevator effect if you only hook up one rudder. When you hook up two, of course, they cancel each other out. The left one in the left turn would go to the left, giving you down. The right one would go to the left, giving you up, and cancel each other out. Now, it is a bit tricky setting up both rudders, because if you create drag on them, if they're both towed in a little, you'll create drag. I myself, with the new expert, World Engines Expert radio that I'm going to be flying this with, and we're the distributors in Canada for now, I'm going to be flying with a complete mixing radio, which I think will be rather unique on the Hornet. I'm going to set it up with two servos, because the wing loading on this aircraft is extremely light, and you can add another pound of weight and still get terrific performance. So I'm going to put a servo on each rudder, which of course will give me my left and my right, but also will tow in at the low throttle settings, or tow in when I put my flaps down, which will also act as air brakes, and because of the pressure above the center of gravity and centers of pressures, will pitch the nose up without stalling. The wingtips will not stall, because you're not forcing beyond its movement. If you pull full up elevator and force it into a stall, you can stall the aircraft. Yeah, it's not like the Reagle Eagle. Reagle Eagle has a delta wing and is almost stall-proof. This is a conventional symmetrical wing, and it will stall if you pull too much elevator at slow speed. But by flaring with towed-in rudders, you cannot over-correct, in other words. You cannot give it too much elevator in this mode. It will just fly nose high and mush forward nice and slow, hopefully. That's what the real one does, so we're going to try it with this one. Now, the other thing we've done with nye rods, and I came up with this, there's always a little slop in nye rods when it curves. So I'm going to have to just go over here a minute and get the nye rod. Now, this is particularly important for elevators. Not so important on this airplane for ailerons, because we're pretty short coupled. The aileron servo will be about here, and you've got a short distance and just barely a curve in it. But a big problem with nye rods, first of all, we use on a jet, we use blue nye rod. Do not use the red, especially on elevators. It's too flexible. What happens with nye rods is they're sloppy. When you get your nye rod, feel it. It's sloppy in there, back and forth. The yellow one is a bit too small for the blue. Now, when you go around a bend like this, when it's got pressure at this end and pressure pushing at this end, the yellow nye rod takes up the slop and gives a little flexing on the surface. In some cases, depends how many S-bends you got. Now in this airplane, one reason we put the torque rods to the inside gives us a straight line through with only one gradual curve into the radio compartment. So we get pretty positive control. But I came up with this idea, and if you find a hardware store some filament strapping tape, very smooth and shiny on one side, very sticky on the other, and it's fiberglass reinforced. That's how you can recognize it. It's got strings of fiberglass running through the tape for strength. Now, again, this tape is very, very smooth, shiny, and slippery on the outside. So if you take a piece of this, about an inch, inch and a half long, and we wrap it carefully, line it up straight, and we wrap it, and take the time, run it into the grooves on the yellow nye rod. There's grooves in this nye rod to help it slide in. Run it into the grooves and wrap it around. Now, only wrap it just one layer of it. If you overlap it, it'll be too tight. I'm going to show you what we're going to do. Now you take and you slice off the excess. That little strip there, because you don't want that wrapped over. It'll be too thick. This is a perfect thickness now to fit into the blue nye rod. It has no slop. There is absolutely no slop now. But it does slide nice and free. So what you should do is put about 3 or 4 pieces of that on from the curved area, from where the nye rod starts to curve and then curves in to hook up to the servo in this area, which will take up that slop on the curve. And when you get it done and hook it up to your servo, you'll then go back to your elevators and you won't have any nye rod slop in there at all. But don't try it with masking tape, don't try it with Scotch tape, it doesn't work. It must be this fiberglass reinforced filament tape, or strapping tape as they call it. Okay, now we can work on our wings. The wings come machine cut to you. They're cut in one piece. They're marked the left and the right. The left is the left as if you're sitting in the cockpit looking out to the left. You're in the cockpit of the airplane looking forward. The left wing is the left wing. Now be sure you put the left and the right on. Although they are symmetrical, there is a slight difference. And if you get them on upside down, well, we haven't flown one with the wings upside down, so I can't tell you what would happen. We have to put a leading and trailing edge on. It's in your kit. The easiest way to do this is start out with a flat table like I've got and use a type-on wood glue or a carpenter's glue, a sandable glue that will not attack foam. There's many products in your hobby shop you can use for this. A white glue is fine. Run a bead of glue down the leading edge of the wing. Put the wood in place. And I have some masking tape here ready that I just put on and run down each side of the wing to hold that wood in position. And I pull the tape very tight, squeeze the glue out. Now we're not going to wait for this glue to dry. I'll show you the next step. You would do the same thing with the trailing edge. When the glue's dry, you remove this tape, of course. And a handy item, if you're building almost any model airplane with balsa wood, or in there really, one of these little razor planes, you can pick them up in a hobby shop or some hardware stores or specialty stores. This one I think is made in Germany. I've had it for about 25 years. You know, it's the best $5 I ever spent. I think they're about $10 now. We have to plane that wood down level with the contour of the wing. Now, so you don't gouge the wing, a little trick I use is I put a layer of masking tape on the foam, butt it up against the wood. And again, I haven't waited for the glue to dry on this, so I'm just showing you, demonstration purposes. Then you take your razor plane and you can plane it down. Very carefully, go slow, plane the wood down to follow the contour of the foam. This masking tape will protect the foam from gouging too badly. Now if you go wildly at it and just go crazy with that plane, you're going to gouge right through the tape. But by going slowly and following the contour, you can plane down your trailing edge and your leading edge. Now, your leading edge should be then sanded round. It can be brought right to a point, but remember, you can in fact add another piece of quarter onto this, and the leading edge of the wing can be tapered right down to knife edge. This will create a little more, this will create instability at slow speeds. Could create buffeting at high speeds if you don't do it right. So I prefer a rounded leading edge. I may lose 2 or 3 miles an hour in flight, but it makes the aircraft much more stable. So you can just contour the leading edge to follow the contour of the wing and round it off nicely. Now the Hornet has no tip on the wing as such. On the plan we mark, it is just sheeted or capped with a piece of scrap quarter or 3/16 balsa. It's a square tip. Now you can add the rocket rails as on the plan, whichever you like. Now the rocket rails should be possibly pinned on or pegged on so they can be removed. They extend quite a bit farther forward to the leading edge. And a grass field landing or a tip of wing, they're broken off. So if you pin them in place so they're removable, it makes a much more satisfactory airplane for rough field flying. Now we'll get... Okay, now we're going to mount the wings. And on the plan, we show the length of the aileron from the tip. The ailerons do not run right out the full span of the wing. This piece of stock here, 3/8 balsa, is glued on and shaped down to follow the contour or airfoil of the wing. And the ailerons fit in this position here. Now, this wing has the trailing, leading tips on. What we do is we take, before the wing is sheeted, and we have wing alignment holes here. We showed you before. We cut some dowel and we put the dowel in position. We give you a piece of dowel in the kit and you cut it up into little 1-inch pieces for each side and such. Now, you take the wing and you align it. It's easier from the other side, but I'm reaching over here so you can see. Align it with the holes. You have to eyeball those holes in the foam wing, because there's 1/4-inch holes in those wings that are put in by the machine cutting. When they're lined up, draw a pencil line along your spar. We're going to slot that spar, or slot the wing for the spar. Now you take your foam and a fine-tooth hacksaw blade or a very sharp knife, and you cut into the foam wing and cut a slot out of the foam for that spar. Now we take and cover the wing. And how we do it is we have 2 or 3 methods we use. On our Reagle Eagle tape, we showed you our ultra-glass system, pre-finished fiberglass sheet, or not pre-painted, but a pre-smoothed or pre-surfaced fiberglass sheet which contact cements on. This is the easiest way, I guess, of all. But another way we can do it with our foam wings is give them a light sanding, and if you take some 4-ounce fiberglass cloth, it may sound a little heavy, but it's not really, and lay out newspaper on your table, because this gets a little messy. Cover the slot with masking tape. So I've done that. so that when you coat the wing with the glass cloth and epoxy method we're going to show you, it doesn't run down into the slot. Strip the masking tape, lay your glass cloth over the wing, smooth it out nice. Now you can take and mix some epoxy up. I like using the 2-hour, 4-hour epoxy. 5 minutes is useless. Forget that. It's got to be at least a 1-hour epoxy. If you take and mix your epoxy up, you got your cloth laid out nice and smooth. Pour it along the leading edge, about 2 or 3 inches back from the leading edge. Pour a bead of it right along, back and forth, and use a bit of judgment. It takes about 3/4 of an ounce per panel. In other words, an ounce and a half per wing, 3 ounces for both wings. Then if you take a piece of balsa wood, which is cut perfectly straight, the edge of a sheet of balsa wood, or a piece like this, or take a ruler and a knife and cut, make sure that balsa is nice and straight. Take and squeegee the epoxy back, from the leading edge back, and then work it this way to take the excess. Keep squeegeeing back until you see the glass cloth is soaked. It will go transparent when the epoxy has penetrated the cloth. If there's spots that aren't transparent, just pour a little more epoxy and then take and come forward to the leading edge. You may have to add just another little bead of epoxy here. Come forward this way. Squeegee it on with a piece of balsa, gets it nice and smooth. Take your time, and if you look at the light a certain way, you can see if there's any ridges, you can smooth it out. Now, when that's dry, and of course any excess that comes off of here, you can just sort of wipe off. When that's dry, it should cure overnight. You can do both left and right wing at the same time, top. Next day, flip them over and do the bottom. Take and trim off the excess glass with a sharp knife. One of these utility knives is handy. You will notice that it's very smooth, but it has the cloth texture to it. So a very light sanding will get rid of some of that texture, not all of it. You don't want to sand right through the cloth. And we're going to show you a finishing method in a few minutes. Right now we'll put the wings on the airplane and see what it looks like. So this would go on the spar, and if we were mounting these permanently, what we would do now is pour epoxy into that slot. Quite a bit of it. Down onto the spar and line up the dowel holes. That's your wing incidence. Now, along here you can epoxy. Just run a bit with your finger temporarily to hold it in place. When that's dry, 5 minutes is good enough for this if you work fast. When that's dry, you can flip it upside down and epoxy the bottom. But you should use a strip of glass cloth and epoxy running from the fuselage here along this gusset, seam the wing on with glass cloth and epoxy. Don't rely just on that spar holding it. It must be seamed to the fuselage for the speed and the maneuvers that this Hornet goes. Now we were showing you how this fits over the wings, it's straight. You must cut this out. And of course it's best done after you get the wing on. You can position it. Fits on like so, and of course will fit and tuck into place like this. And then this can be seamed on as well and seamed across here. And it should be a little glass cloth and epoxy to hold this in place. Again, remember, sand your fiberglass parts for epoxy to stick to it. Now, that would be your wings in position. You would do the same with the left wing. The alignment holes are accurate. It's proved to work very well on the Reagle Eagle planes for me. You can, however, use an incidence meter if you wish, but one trick is to get the wings level, is to cut a strip of balsa wood the height of this wing. Make sure your fuselage sitting on a block or blocked up on boxes, or sitting on the wheels are level. Cut a piece of balsa wood to the height to hold that wing up, just where you want it coming level. It should be level at the top. If it has a slight droop or a slight anhedral, that won't hurt. The real one has. With this piece of wood cut to the right length, block that up. When that epoxy is thoroughly dried and that wing's in position, slide your other wing on and use the same piece of wood at the same point on the wing to block that wing into position. Then you get your wings nice and level, both of them. However, if one is drooping a little, it just won't look nice. It'll still fly well. But with a plane that flies 160 miles an hour, the more accurate on your alignment, the better it will track through the air, the better it'll perform, and you'll generally like flying it better. You'll feel very comfortable with it. The plane is designed to fly well, and the alignment we've given you is the best we can possibly do in the kit. However, there is a certain amount that is up to you. The Eagle is, some of the alignments are more automatic and they're not as critical. A delta wing isn't as critical on having one wing twisted or out of alignment from the other one. But as the cord in the wing shortens down on airplanes, then the alignment of the wing becomes more critical and you get the propeller effect or aileron effect if one wing is twisted. On a large or long cord wing like a Delta, like the Eagle or our Arrow, it's not quite as critical. This airplane is a little more critical on the building, but it's well worth it. It's a beautiful airplane. So we can go on to putting the belly pan, or at least fitting it into position now. So we'll show you that. We have to turn the plane upside down again for that. Now, for any of you that have built the Reagle Eagle, you'll recognize our famous belly pan. That's a 1-inch contour, 1-inch deep contour, and that allows us to get a large pan in a small airplane, along with the shape of the top, of course. The top of the fan part of it is buried in this fairing at the top. This belly pan is the same as the Reagle Eagles or our Arrow, except for one thing. It's molded with a contour at the back end, because we cannot mold just flat. It doesn't hold its shape. It would warp in the box. So it has a contour. The contour for the Hornet must be cut off. It must be cut off about a ½ an inch back from the end, because it has to fit to the back and push down flush and be glued flush. Because with that contour, it would create a lip and throw the thrust line off. So it's very important. ½ an inch of this pan has to be cut off so it fits and glues on flush with the bottom of the tail cones. Now, we have to have a hatch in the bottom, unlike the Eagle. So when this is put into position here, easiest thing to do is to mark at the fan. That is the entrance to the air, the beginning of the fan shroud, right here. So we take that and we put a little scratch on that. And we scratch it on this side. And we scratch it on that side. Our fiberglass is transparent, so you can see through it. Now this must be cut off. You cut this with a fine tooth hacksaw blade. You cut the front part of the bottom pan away from the rest of it. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut that off. Okay? Now. Okay, now I've gone over my trusty little bandsaw and I've sliced that off at the beginning of the fan. So now that fiberglass belly pan fits at the back flush with the tail cones and should be seamed on with glass cloth and epoxy. You've epoxied the tail cones on, you've got some wood here, and this is glass cloth and epoxied up here, so now you should run a strip all the way down, because this belly pan can take a bit of a beating if you happen to land with your wheels retracted. So I've done that. So now you fit this on. This will automatically form a concave on the bottom, which contours to the tail cones and really looks almost scaled. And the real Hornet is deeper than what we have here, but well, we can't have everything with a model like this. Now, seam this on. Front part is your hatch. Now your bottom leg, like the Reagle Eagle and our arrow, extends below this belly pan a low. So you have to notch this part here. Just notch that out so it slides over that bottom leg. When this is notched, it will slide over. You can then take this front part over about 1/2 inch and you can screw it in place with about 4 screws. Being careful, of course, not to drill right through your fan shroud and run a long screw in that the blades can hit. But there is plenty of room for a number 2 1/2 inch long screws. Epoxy a couple of little plywood plates or hardwood plates under here, because the front part of the hatch you drill through here, well, 3 spots is what I use, and again the number 2 screws go into through this balsa, through the glass balsa, into the plywood plates, and that hatch is then removable to pull the engine out from the bottom. So that's the difference on the belly pan with the Hornet compared to the Eagle and the Arrow, is the front part is put on separately, screwed on, the back part has to fit level and flush with the tail cones because of the internal thrust. The ducting is such that there is no internal thrust tube, so the fuselage itself is the ducting. Now, before we put the bottom belly pan on permanently, you can cut and fit it at any stage and put your blocks in and drill through for your screws. Before it's seamed on permanently again, you want to make doubly sure that you have all the inside coated with a fuel-proofing dope, polyurethane or resin. Make sure that your blind nuts are securely anchored in place, that they've been epoxied really securely, that your blind nuts aren't going to fall off if you take your fan out. And clean up the holes for the retracts. Bottom is glass cloth. You should glass cloth the stress areas, that is a section around the intakes here. Glass cloth and epoxy or resin. I glass cloth the nose from about here up. It just strengthens it up, especially getting it in and out of a car or a van if you happen to ding it. Now, on the inside, because we've got 2 round tail cones, well, I'll turn it this way. The camera will be able to see it better. We have 2 round tail cones on the Hornet. And on the Eagle, on our tail cone system, we deliberately had a buffer or a stopper between, in other words, it stopped some of the air and acted as an internal sort of air brake to deliberately really slow the airplane down, to give fellows a chance to learn to fly jets and still have ample power. All that did was take the edge off the top end speed, but it didn't reduce the power output for taking off grass and such. But for this one, we're going to. So at this point here, you'll notice on the inside of the airplane, of course, is this piece of wood. Well, if we remove it out of there, it'll weaken the structure, so we don't want to do that. You will have to fabricate a little piece of balsa shaped like a triangle, or you can use a piece of triangle stock. Set it in at the top and bottom. It needs one both at the top and one at the bottom. you can put it in with a bit of resin or epoxy, and then you'll have to reach in with sandpaper from the tail cones and sand it to the contour. I've done that already. Now sand it to the contour of the inside of the tail cones and taper it down. Now if you don't put these in, these are the exhaust splitters to direct it into the tail cones rather than hit a section of blunt wall, you might call it. If you don't put these in, the airplane will still fly and fly extremely well. But we've designed the Hornet for speed. The Eagle was designed for another purpose. It was designed to fly and maneuver and be a very stable, easy flying airplane. The Hornet is designed to be what it is in real life, and that is fast and awesome vertical. I mean, it is just a powerful aircraft. Well, it'll fly slow too, but we want that top end to be a little more perhaps than what the Eagle is, so put those splitters in. It's only an hour's work, but it's well worth it. And again, now you have to check everything out thoroughly before you put that bottom pan on, and especially the top pan too. Make sure your retracts all are lined up and the angle's right to fit in. Hook up all your air hoses, or if you're putting mechanical retracts, put in your push rods to your servos, put your radio in at this point, hook up your rods to it. Make sure the whole system is working before you put the bottom and the top fiberglass pieces on. Now the balance is shown, or the center of gravity is shown on the plan, and it will balance pretty darn close right out of the box as you build it with 5 servos in the nose. 4 for operations and 1 for retracts. If you're going to add extra servos for flaps or flaperons or the rudders that I explained, then try and get your servos as far to the back as possible. Position we show you on the plan gives you ample room to move and put your servos in and get at them. But if you're going to add more servos, rather than add weight to the airplane to balance it later in the tail or something, best to put those servos in as far back as you can get them. Now this airplane flies a little differently as far as fuel, getting its fuel supply, as the Reagle Eagle did. The Reagle Eagle took 2 tanks, equal-sized tanks in the wings. Now, the Hornet can't do that. Wings are thinner. So what we do is in here, after this is on, before the tune pipe is permanently put in place, we install a fuel tank right up in here, about 2 inches, 3 inches ahead of the engine, right in this area, which is just slightly ahead of the center of gravity, which is a perfect place for the tank. And that will hold a 12 to 14 ounce. I've got a 14 ounce in mine, no problem. A square one, round one, you name it, it'll fit in there. Pretty big cavity. But because of the nature of this airplane and the fuel tank being high, is the only place for that much fuel, we have to have a small 4-ounce feeder tank. So there has to be another tank installed, which will be below the tune pipe, in line with the carburetor, right in here. And it can be installed from the bottom before you put the bottom radio hatch on. A 4-ounce tank here, directly in line with the carburetor. It will gravity feed from the big tank into the small tank. You'll get constant fuel supply into the carburetor from the small feeder tank. If you go inverted, of course, you will have 4 ounces of fuel to fly inverted on, which is still a good 3.5, 4 minutes of flying inverted. So I don't think it's a concern. Now, if you're going to fly inverted the whole flight, and your main tank is not going to feed into the small one if you're inverted, you can put the peri-oscillating pump on the engine. I flew with one the other day, put one on for the first time, and it was amazing what it did for the reliability of my engine. It's the best $20 I've ever spent, I think, other than my plane. But the pump, it's an oscillating pump, so you don't have to drill in your engine for pressure or anything. You just install it to the bottom bolts on your crankcase, and it works off the vibrations of the engine. And follow the instructions. It's very easy to install. It's a 10-minute job, if that. And we still use the feeder tank, but what it will do is it draws a constant supply of fuel from just anywhere it can get it, and high G maneuvers, inverted, whatever. The engine just never misses a beat. You needle it on the ground to get your setting, and it never changes throughout the whole flight. So for positive fuel feed and aerobatic flying or pattern type flying, a peri-oscillating pump, I feel, is a good investment on this type of an airplane. Now the other thing I guess we'll have to watch for really is there are fellas that are going to possibly change this a little, because it is a balsa wood airplane, and we've had fellas that change the Eagle, Reagle Eagle, and changes are fine. I encourage it. If you can make it a little more scale, by all means. If you want to do a little more carving or add a piece of balsa wood, to add something to it, or shape it differently, shaping the nose, if you want to make it a little different shape, that's fine. I encourage this, but do not change the inlets. The inlet shape is not as critical as in the past we thought. They do not have to be teardropped or airfoiled to the inside. Just the 3/16 wood, and then you can glass over that and just round them off so they look nice. Just sand them, round it off, is fine. The fan will get air from wherever it can get it. But, however, the intake size can't be changed. In other words, if you decide that, oh gee, the real Hornet is a quarter of an inch narrower than this, so you're going to cut the spar width down and move the fuselage in a little narrower, do not change this. We need the square inch area of those intakes. It just has to be, when we designed the aircraft, we first put balsa wood here, which blocked, believe it or not, because we were lined up here, it blocked a 3/16 thickness at the top, and thrust dropped drastically. We now have it in fiberglass, and it is, of course, hollow so that it gets its air. If you look at the airplane, the intakes look almost scale in size here, but they really are this much higher because the air is right up underneath here, getting right in. In other words, if the air intakes were the scale intakes, which start at the bottom of the wing there, we wouldn't have enough. But this is a very scale appearance, and doesn't detract from the thrust or the air we need for the fan. The fan has to get air in to push air out. Now, we were going to show you some of our finishing techniques, but unfortunately, we ran into a bit of a problem. We're running into our 2-hour tape, and judging when we edited and put the flying on with this construction sequence, I don't think we're going to have enough time for it. But I can give you a quick rundown. We try to be very innovative here at Parkson Flying Models, and a lot of modelers have phoned me with the Eagle, and they said, well, I live in an apartment and I don't want to use smelly paints. I can't spray paint and such, and I can't make too much mess. How can I finish a balsa wood and fiberglass airplane? Well, we have come up with some systems that work well, and we do have them for sale. There's a balsa wood filler, there's a fiberglass primer, there's a putty filler for gussets that really is so compatible. This is it. All these products have to be compatible. We were going to give you a demonstration, but it would take a little longer than we have tape, I'm afraid. But however, we will type out a list possibly of the products and what their uses are in an instruction sheet. and we will do our best to mail them out or include them in the kits. They're going to be, of course, reasonably priced. And give you the right amount so that you're not buying a lot of product to finish one airplane and the rest gets wasted. We have a beautiful enamel that brushes very smooth. It's almost as good as a spray paint job for people in apartments. It's almost odorless. It doesn't have an objectionable odor. We use a special latex filler coat for the balsa, very easily sandable, and again, it's almost odorless, dries fast. So we'll put a list in, possibly in the kits if we get it done, of these products, and maybe make a video in the future to show you our new finishing techniques. So I know you'll enjoy building your Hornet and flying it. It's a little trickier than a Reagle Eagle, but it's well worth it, and it sure looks great in the air as you saw on the videotape. Bye for now.